So good evening and welcome to the Guruvayurappan Temple of Brampton's lecture series. And today we are presenting a topic called the Prelude to Karma Yoga. So approximately this talk is going to be approximately 55 minutes in length. And this particular presentation has got quite a few slides, around 60 slides or so. And I'm not sure if I can show and explain everything, but whatever the time permits, we will go through it. Making sure that we cover the crux of the topic today. So before we start any program, we always have an invocation mantra or an invocation prayer. So let's start this wonderful program and a beautiful day today with a very nice invocation mantra. Om Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmatacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. The meaning of this beautiful stanza goes somewhat like this. Salutation to the lineage starting with Lord Sadashiva or Lord Shiva, with Adi Shankaracharya or Bhagavad Pada in the middle, and continuing up to my immediate teacher, Puja Gurudev Swami Chinmayananda Ji. I've been a disciple or an ardent follower of Swami Gurudev or Swami Chinmayananda Ji for the last 35 years. Started with my Yuva Kendra days and just got hooked onto it. So what all you're going to see today, what all things I'm going to cover today are basically what I've learned from Swami Chinmayananda, Chinmaya Mission, and the entire lineage of other gurus Swami Chinmayananda had ordained. So there's nothing out of my own. So what all I'm repeating today are just what I've learned from my Puja Gurudev. So all glories goes to him. So if there are any mistakes in it, please do excuse me. The mistakes are mine alone. And if there are any room for improvement, or if you would like to correct me, please feel free to end of this class to mention this to me as well. So what you see on the screen right now is the Guruvayurappan Temple of Brampton. And this is located in Canada, very close to the Toronto airport, around 10 or 15 minutes from the airport. So for people who are connecting it from North America and all over the world, this is how our temple looks like. So if you're coming to Toronto, please do make it a point to visit our temple. And if you need more details, you can go to www.guruvayur.ca.
Oh my God, ഇതിപ്പോ vibes ഇല്ലടോ vibe.
So if you look at the details and classes and sessions offered by Guruvayurappan Temple of Brampton, we got around 12 classes or sessions offered. And the Guruvayurappan Temple of Brampton has a wonderful motto saying that the Vidya Dhanam should not be charged and should be given free of all to everyone, all seekers. So with that mantra, we are offering these wonderful courses. So if you're interested, please do let us know. Please do contact the temple so we can get registered. So coming back to our topic, Prelude to Karma Yoga. The reason we had this particular topic was we have been having a detailed Gita Shastra class for the last 2 years, and we covered the first chapter of Gita, Arjuna Vishada Yoga, then the second chapter of Gita, Sankhya Yogam, and today we are planning to get into the third chapter, Karma Yoga. And we had a small summer break as well. So a lot of things which we have learned, we could have just, we thought we could have refresh those things in our memory so that when we go into the new class, it will come up. And also we thought it would be a good opportunity to give a quick introduction on Karma Yoga. What exactly is Karma Yoga? How does it gel well with the other two types of yoga, which we always listen or hear about when we read any Bhagavad Gita? What are the intricacies of Karma Yoga? What are the prerequisites for it? Why should we do it? What shouldn't we do it? What exactly is it? So we are looking at it from a very, very basic level. And that's one of the reasons, since we're covering it from a very basic level, we said we'll call it as a prelude to Karma Yoga. And I strongly believe that every pictographic images you show conveys more than 1,000 words or messages. So that is why you see lots of pictographs or charts in this PowerPoint presentation, trying to emphasize and trying to nail down the wonderful concept of Karma Yoga as clearly specified in our Sanatana Dharmic text. So when you look at holy Veda. And when you look at the end of the Veda or the Vedanta, now we realize that the central message that's been said in Veda or the Bhagavad Gita are same. They're identical. So Bhagavad Gita condenses the entire Vedic essence into beautiful 701 shlokas. And especially when you start looking at it from the perspective of our real nature, our Atman. And when we start questioning ourselves, who we truly are, who am I, what am I? So those are the questions that gets answered in Veda, and it also gets answered very succinctly, to the point, very precisely in Bhagavad Gita as well. So the PowerPoint slide you're looking at talks about the chapter 2 summary of what we learned. So I'm not going to go in depth, but there are two main things which I would like to point out to you. The first and the last bullets there. The first bullet talks about an acronym called NICE, N-I-C-E, which is the very crux of it. What's the difference between Atman and Atma? And where when you talk about NICE, we talk about the Atma, they say, birth and death, it's indestructible, imperishable, it's changeless and eternal. And when you go to the very last bullet, that is where we talk about the ladder of fall, how we get entangled in this web and how we fall. So the next slide shows us from the Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, just quickly recapping on it, on verses 62 and 63, how a potential man can fall from the heights into the temptation of ruin or into the very bottomless depths. So this is where we look at Vivekam, the discrimination, and the delusion we have. So mathematically, if you want to relate it, discrimination and delusion are inversely proportional. That's been shown there. So what happens is, like, if you have lesser or very less delusion, your discrimination would be so high. You would be able to discriminate and make a good judgment, a higher strength. But what happens when your delusion really goes very high is your discrimination goes down. So when you look at from these things, a human being, when he gets attacked or attached to any sense objects, which we all do, we get so attached to one particular sense object, and this particular sense objects, we start to brood on it. Then this particular craving starts building up in our system. We either want it or we don't want it. It's a raga or the dvesha, the likes or the dislike. If you like it, we will make it sure that we get it at any cost. And if we don't like it, we will try to make sure that we don't get it at any cost. And we will go to any certain amount of extent of length to get that. And if things don't go as we plan, which often does, anger starts to come in. And this particular anger gives rise to delusion, and this delusion breeds loss of memory, and this loss of memory causes decaying of our discrimination, because as we learned, when the delusion goes up, the discriminatory power comes down, and when the power of discrimination goes up, the annihilation of the spiritual life really shatters. We fall down from the zenith to the nadir. So that's what we talk about, the fall of a human being. So when you come into the Karma Yoga, especially this beautiful third chapter, the whole thing in Gita, or from the aspect, from a higher aspect, you can put it in two simple sentences. What exactly do we want? Are we looking at success in human life, or are we looking at success of human life? So these two sentences may look same, but when you start looking into it in greater length, success in human life and success of human life are totally two divergent topics. They're totally different. They're totally mutually not exclusive. So most human beings look for one or the other. So in this particular presentation, we would be looking at ways why we look at it, and we would also compare at the very end as well. And when you take a typical Bhagavad Gita book, and when you start reading it, or when you start listening to the satsangs in Instagram or YouTube or on any other social media, The references they always make to karma yoga is like self-sacrifice or sacrificing oneself. Not from a killing aspect, but sacrifice here means just giving up something, doing something. And the other aspect from you look at from a bhakti yoga is self-surrendering. And from a jnana yoga, you always hear the words self-denial. So these are the common words which you typically hear when you go through books and read through books, and it typically confuses every one of us, especially if you are a rookie to this particular subject. So the person who reads it first always thinks, okay, bhakti is different, karma is different, jnana is different. These three are three different roads leading to three different directions, as I see on the roadmap at my top left corner. But when you start slowly reading into it, when you slowly looking into it, when you start to analyze it, you see there's lots of interconnections. There's lots of intersections between bhakti yoga and karma yoga and jnana yoga and jnana yoga and bhakti yoga. So you think it's just like a mesh of streets happening here, crisscrossing each and every location. That then when you finally start to look, when you start to analyze, you realize even though you thought that the bhakti yoga, karma yoga, and jnana yoga are taking three different divergent paths, but actually they're converging at one location. Then when you start to slowly contemplate, when you start to go dwell into it, understand it, then you realize bhakti, karma, and jnana, all three are interconnected. And there is a lot of explicit and implicit connections between these three yogas. And there is no demarcation between them. One path does not exclude other. One path complements other. One path leads into other. So based on the natural aptitude of a person, one can either go with a bhakti yoga or a karma yoga or a jnana yoga, and each path blends into one another and takes us to the final goal. So that is how when people start to look into it, they slowly realize that this new concept sets into our mind, clarifying our questions. So in one of those satsangs which I attended, one of those gurus pointed out this particular theory to me. It said bhakti yoga is nothing but attaching the mind to the Lord. And if you have your mind attached to the Lord, and if you start to act in the world outside, it's nothing but karma yoga. So when you attach your mind to the Lord, just like you do in a bhakti yoga, and when you try to lift your mind and yourself, and when you try to merge with the Lord, it's jnana yoga. It may sound a little bit rustic when you hear it, but when you start looking into it, it makes a lot of sense. Attaching to the mind to the Lord, bhakti yoga, attaching the mind to the Lord and acting in the world outside, karma yoga, and attaching the mind to the Lord and lifting the mind or ourselves to merge with the Lord, jnana yoga. So here what's going to happen here is we will be spending quite a lot of time on the karma yoga, the midsection here. And when you look into it, the karma yoga, when you start to look into the interrelationships that happen between the bhakti, the karma, and the jnana yoga, the easiest way to put together is just like a gear, a set of gears. If one gear spins, it gets connected, and this gear revolution gets transmitted to the subsequent gears. These three yogas are very similar to that. So when you look at karma yoga is nothing but a path of selfless action. Karma is action. Yoga is nothing but yuj. You're connecting it. And when you're doing karma yoga, you always do it from the perspective of the body because it is an action and the action always gets carried out through the body. And the easiest sense which you do it is a puja, which we all do most of the time, where we try to control our body or control our senses and try to bring it. The next comes the bhakti yoga, which is a path of the devotion where the mind gets prominence. In karma, the body was prominent, and in the bhakti yoga, the mind gets prominent. And when you look at the structure of stuff which happens, it's mostly happens when japa, when you're having desires and feelings, when you try to control your desires and when you control your feeling, japa is more commonly mentioned as a technique of bhakti yoga. Then comes jnana yoga, where the dhyanam or the meditation or the thoughts comes in, and that channelizes your path of knowledge or your intellect. Because what happens is that when the intellect is fixed on a goal, the intellect is a higher power, and the intellect makes the mind surrender to the goal. The mind, as they say, is just like a monkey, a wild monkey, a drunk monkey, or a monkey bitten with a scorpion, jumping from here and there, which cannot be controlled. And the body, which is a housing of the senses there, the mind gets easily distracted by the senses. So when the intellect gets fixed on a goal and when the mind slowly surrenders to the goal, the body and the senses works together and it surrenders to the mind. And slowly the mind gets controlled. So that is what the permanent solution, when you look at the bhakti yoga, the karma yoga, and the jnana yoga, the permanent solution says you need to free the body from the sensual demands. So the mind automatically gets freed from expectations. And when the mind becomes freed from expectations, the intellect gets free from ideas. So when you look at what a bhakti yoga is, a bhakti yoga, it channelizes the mind. And most importantly, it removes the vikshepam of the mind. A vikshepam of the mind is a tossing of the mind, because the mind always has a tendency, like a pendulum, to oscillate from one point to the other point. So the bhakti, and especially a true bhakta, is able to channelize his or her mind. A true bhakta is able to control the raga and the dvesha, the likes or the dislikes, which helps to purify the mind. And the purification of the mind, which also happens quite a lot when you're doing work in karma yoga, is typically called as chitta shuddhi. Chittam is the mind, and shuddhi is a purification or clarification. So when that happens, your whole antakaranam, mano, buddhi, ahangara, chittam, gets stabilized. And the other beauty of the bhakti yoga is when you start doing bhakti yoga, when you are a true bhakta, you start to look at every person from an egalitarian perspective. You look at person from an impartial. You don't basically classify them in different classes. You treat everyone equal. There's an equanimity in your viewpoint, in your action, in your thoughts. And similarly, for a easiest way for a person to embark on these three yoga, it could be the karma yoga, jnana yoga, or bhakti yoga. The bhakti yoga is the easiest one to do it because there are no conditions, there are no prerequisites. Because for karma yoga, there are some prerequisites. For some jnana yoga, there are some prerequisites. From a bhakti yoga, you don't have any prerequisites. And bhakti yoga helps you to make the vasanas disappear, and your arrogant self-assertions or your glorifications, your pompousness, or all those kind of attitudes mellows down, calms down. And that's why when it comes to bhakti yoga, there's a very beautiful saying called sparopakaram idam shariram. This body which we have is for the service of others. That is how a true bhakta acts. When it comes to Jnana Yoga is a path of knowledge, self-realization. And what happens here is a practice of where you go into the meditative, a self-inquiry, into a new contemplative mode using an intellectual or a thought types, then you try to reach your higher self. The reason I'm explaining about this Bhakti Yoga and Jnana Yoga is because when we get into the crux of the meeting today, which is Karma Yoga, everything gets interconnected. So it makes it easier once we understand the basics. And Karma Yoga is basically directed for people who are extroverts, who are physically active, who are very dynamic, because every human being is compelled to act, and a human being cannot remain without action. And the beauty about karma yoga is there is a beautiful saying in some Sanskritam called Chittasya Shuddhaye Karma, because it purifies and stabilizes the mind, making it ready for Jnana Yoga. Very similar to Bhakti Yoga, it also helps you to clean the vasana or exhaust the vasana. And it works in tandem with the other two yogas as well. So a person, when he starts doing karma yoga, he does not worry about the past, the dead past, as we call it, or they do not worry about the anxieties of the future that's yet to be born. He or she is the present, and they tackle what's in the present. And every action that the person does is always prompted by desires. And every action, if we don't do it in the right way, will always chain us down. So there are techniques in karma yoga by which we don't get chained ourselves down, so that we can elevate from ourself to much more higher self, reducing our pride or destroying our selfishness, greed, anger, or egoism. So when you look at karma yoga is always said it's just a mix of two items, an action and a doership. Karma yoga, everyone has to act. And when you look at doership, a doership is something very unique to human beings. So when it comes to animals, animals don't have karma. The reason they don't have karma is because they don't have a sense of doership. They act instinctively. They act based on nature. Ahara, Nidram, Bhayam, Maituram. These are the four things that every animal does. And whatever instinct prompts us, whatever instinct they get at that particular moment of time, at that instant of time, they do it. Whereas human beings are a lot different. We have the intellect. So that is why the doership takes more prominence in human beings. And whenever we talk about doership in human beings, the free will always exists. Because every action which we do, we always have two choices. We can either do it or not do it. So that is where your free will comes. And an ideal karma yogi, when he typically does it, he or she will never look at the fruits of action or the personal gains, as we have heard it from the very famous sloka popularized by the Mahabharata TV series, right? Karmaneva adhikaraste ma paleshu kadachana. And when you look at these ones, the main qualities of a true karma yogi is how you control the raga and dvesha. How do we make sure that we don't bind them? And to have some sort of equanimity, a samatvam, where my likes and dislikes don't come and bother me. How do I do it? How do I control my senses, my indriyas? How do the indriya nigraham happens so that I can control my body? How do I do my mano nigraham? That is my thought control, so that I can control my mind, so that I can elevate myself. As Lord Krishna said about the Siddha Prajna, who is just a mix of karma yoga and the jnana yoga principles, a person somewhere with clear self-knowledge, one who is steadfast in perfect knowledge. To have that, one need to have indriya nigraham and mano nigraham. These terms may sound a little fancy, but as we go, we will slowly dissect it and we will look into it. And when you look at this particular table, you clearly see what the problem is, what the solution is, how the method is. So any problems which we have from this particular perspective can be grouped into three. Ajnanam or avaranam, a veil where you have an ignorance. Vikshepam, where you have a scattered mind, which we just completely read it in Bhakti Yoga, saying that Bhakti Yoga helps with Vikshepam, a scattered mind like a pendulum-like structure, or the malam. Malam here basically means impurities of the mind. So avaranam or ajnanam, the ignorance, gets solved with jnanam. Jnanam removes ajnanam. Knowledge removes ignorance. And the easiest method to do it is jnana yoga. And this is where the shravanam, mananam, and nididhyasanam comes. And vikshepam, the scattered mind, the pendulum type mind, where you just keep going from one to the other. The solution is you need to have ekagrata. You need to have concentration. And how do we do it? The method is Bhakti Yoga or Upasana. Or when you have so much of impurities in your mind, you need to purify the mind. That is where the Chitta Shuddhi comes in. And how is Chitta Shuddhi inculcated? We use Karma Yoga, selfless action. But the beauty is this karma yoga or selfless action, when you start performing it, it purifies the mind, it comes to a good chitta shuddhi. And once you have chitta shuddhi, it takes you to ekagrata, concentration. And once you have concentration, you elevate yourselves to higher knowledge. So everything is connected here. So even in bhakti, you talk about prapannam and prapati. And similarly, you talk about Atmanikshepam as well, the self-surrender. So if you look at this particular chart, every action or every yoga is interconnected. One leads into the other. And that is why when you look at the Vishnu Puranam text, you see Garuda flying, and the Garuda is a Vahana of Lord Vishnu. And when Garuda is flying, the Puranic scriptures clearly says or equates the two wings of Garuda, one to be Karma Yoga or one to be Bhakti Yoga. And when both the wings are of equal strength, of equal caliber, and when it slowly lifts one to a higher plane of Jnana Yoga, it takes you to a higher and higher plane where you totally realize it. So this is one of the symbolic representations Hinduism uses to say that even though these three yogas are different, actually they all feed into one another. They all interconnected. So this is where Adi Shankaracharya's beautiful wordings come into it. So when he looks into it from an academic perspective, Adi Shankaracharya keeps telling us there are only two types of yoga. One is jnana, knowledge, and the other one is action. Then you may wonder, what happened to bhakti? So Adi Shankaracharya, from this academic pursuit, he mentions bhakti is nothing but a bhavana. Bhakti is always expressed as a puja, a bhajan, or a philanthropy. And it always involves some sort of an action. So think about it, puja, bhajans, or when you're doing some selfless service, seva. It's all some sort of an action is there, karma is there. So from an academic perspective, Bhagavad Pada groups bhakti under the fold of karma. And that is why he keeps telling karma yoga is necessary to understand jnana yoga. And jnana yoga without understanding karma yoga is baseless. And similarly, Shankaracharya also says, if you don't have bhakti, you will never get jnanam. And if you have no jnanam, bhakti is meaningless. So this gives you a very good example saying that everything we look at it is all interconnected. So look at this roller coaster coming down. This particular roller coaster can be equated to our life. It's going up and down. So when it takes a deep plunge for the minute before, or the minute prior, we didn't know it was going to take a such plunge, and the whole thing comes coming down with an unexpected twist, unexpected turns, just like our life. And everything is in this particular cycle for a human life as well. You encounter disease, you encounter misery, you encounter death. Nothing escapes this life cycle. And this is where the Advaitic Jnanam says the root cause of all these problems is the attachment. And to clear the attachment takes you to moksha, or takes you to the Atma Jnanam or the Brahma Jnanam. And to do that, one need to clear the ignorance, because this particular ignorance is preventing us from reaching the knowledge. So this is where the realization has to set in. So this is where when we have lots of likes, raga, or lots of dislikes, dvesha, these things come and impinge on us, and all the things create some sort of a big impurity in our mind. It drives our psyche, and our whole mind is like a whirlpool of agitation. We get bogged down. But for us to reach a higher self, which need a calmer self, this is where karma yoga comes in. So that is why we always term Karma Yoga as a means of purification, and we always term Jnana Yoga as a means of liberation. So how do we do it? And that is where we first looked at the ladder of fall, and now we are looking at the opposite cycle. So every rise gives to a fall, and every low down or ebb goes up. So how do we do it? It's simply explained in simple steps, like, understand what a samsara is. And you need to have a strong desire that you need to get out of this particular problem, get out of this samsara from this particular wheel. And you need to have a sense of need or urgency to doubt your actions, find a solution, understand your helplessness. And this is where the concept of Sharanagati comes in. And this is where you go into a guru or a shastram to look into more details. And this whole thing from a karma yogic perspective can be grouped into two categories. One is a right attitude and one is a right action. So when we look at right action, the two questions which we need to ask, what should I do? What should I avoid? So these are the two questions one need to ask constantly when it comes to the right action. What should I do and what should I avoid? And when it comes to the right attitude, it's how should I work and how should I face the results? So these are the two halves of the Karma Yoga, which we will be looking into in a deeper in the next few slides. So every person has to act, and an action is neither good nor bad. An action is neither good nor bad. That is like one of the crux messages of our Karma Yogic principle. An action becomes good or an action becomes bad based on the motive alone. That is a mental attitude of the doer. So an action is neither good or bad, but becomes good or bad based on the motive. And this is where Swami Chinmayananda clearly comes back and comes up with three different definitions for action. And he keeps saying that human beings have to act. Action is a must. And when you look at action, there's three types of action that he specifically mentions. The first one is called action, where you have a dynamic and a conscious work, where you have so much of urge to reach a goal, fulfill a desire. Could be an artha or a kama from that perspective. And that is some sort of a rajasic tendency which we all have. And the second one is called inaction. Inaction is basically you're running away from it. You don't want to do it. You'll talk about the inactivity, the inertia, the laziness, the stupidness. And this is what in Sanskritam is called naishkarmyam. This is a state of actionless. But theory, when you look at it, a person can never be actionless. It is impossible. It is against the law of nature to be in this inaction mode for a very, very, very long time. And this is where you have the maximum tamasic gunas associated with it. Then comes the last one called unaction. So unaction is where you do act. You perform an action. But when you do the act, when you perform the act, you have no desire for the result. This is the attitude of the good seekers who are walking on the path of renunciation or knowledge. And these people who do an action the most will have lots and lots of sattvic gunas with them. So this is how easily we can look at these three stuff. And when you start comparing it with Purusharthas, right? Purusharthas is nothing but the object of human pursuit, or even you could call it as a goal of human life. There are four Purusharthas, as we all know: Artha, Kama, Dharma, Moksha. Artha is security. That is a basic stepping stone we all have, or we all need, we all look forward to. That is our goal number one. And once you have a little bit of security and once of it comes, then comes pleasures. Oh, I would like to have this, I would like to have that. Oh, I don't want this, I don't want that. So every karma comes into the second stage once you have artha. Then comes dharma, and the dharma is built into artha and kama, so that these three secondary goals will take you to the real goal, the goal number 4 as shown there, the primary goal, the moksha or liberation. So if you look at the table below also captures the same essence, but in different wordings. It talks about the artha, where you need to have there's a need to provide security, where you need to have some sort of an economic values associated with life, and karma, which gives you comforts, which gives you luxuries, which gives you the simple pleasures and the lengthy pleasures and all the pleasures you need in your life. So these two things should be treated as byproducts. And our focus should be on dharma. Make sure that we follow a dharmic life, an ethical way of life, a righteous way of life, so that we get into moksha, the liberation from samsara. And that is why when they talk about moksha, they clearly say it is not a freedom from action, but a freedom in action. So they basically, as we all know, vasanas, right? Vasanas comes into it as inherent tendencies. It pops up as in our intellect as desires. And the moment it pops up as little desires, like a small bubbles, coming effervescence on the top of a pop can, these desires percolates and gives into our mind the thoughts, because mind is nothing but a collection of thoughts. And when we have these kind of thoughts coming and agitating in our mind, the body is forced to act. And that is how the vasanas enter into our body through the intellect and through the mind. And the way we need to do it is we need to break away from the cycle of samsara, the cycle of life and death, the cycle of punarapi maranam, punarapi jananam. Samsara, as they say it, is called samyak sarati idi samsara. And once you get into the crux of samsara, it is a never-ending chain. You have raga or dvesha, attachment or likes, then it always leads to shoga. When you don't get it, you feel sad. When you get it, you're afraid that you're going to lose it. Then it gets into a kind of deluded mode, and the whole thing goes around and round and round and round. And it affects your life. It affects your future vasanas. And what happens is like the kama, krodha, lobha, mada, moha, matsarya, everything just starts to grow. And it takes you away from the path. So we need to tune our mind away from samsara. The moment we turn our mind towards the world, we go into the circle of samsara. But when you tune the mind away from samsara or away from the world towards God, then that leads to moksha. And this is where the manonasham, the dissolution of the mind, whereby you burn or efface all vasanas, comes into picture. And this is where when you go into the jnana yoga or the jnana abhyasam, the shravana maranam nididhyasanam, to tune your mind and get clear of it. And the reason you do it is because the interaction of the senses, the object and the vasanas, will always take you to a perception of pain and pleasure. And this pain and pleasure will bring you to another one where you have a desire to gain more pleasure, or you will have a desire to avoid pain at all cost. And when you are into the rut of this cycle, you develop more and more vasanas. Your vasanas get stronger and stronger. So to efface the perception of pain and pleasure, that is where you need to have a equanimity. And to make sure that your desire to gain more and more pleasure, or your desire to avoid less and less pain, that is where the indifference to rewards comes in. Equanimity on one side, indifference of rewards on the other side. And the balance in between, the thing that links the both, is karma yoga. So I don't think we will have time to go through these stuff. So we're just going into it. So the path towards moksha, how do we do it? It's by two simple things. One is a proper action, and the one is a proper attitude. And when you look into the proper action, you try to do a lot of sattvic karmas as we looked at it. You try to do a appropriate amount of rajasic karmas as and when the action demands. And you try to reduce the tamasic karmas as much as possible. The beauty about these three gunas is you cannot completely neglect one. You cannot completely say, oh, I'm not going to be a tamasic at all. You need a little bit of tamas. But the balance one needs to find out. And similarly, when you come to the proper attitude, this is where the Ishvara Arpana Buddhi comes in. This is where the equanimity or the samatvam comes in. This is where you say, all actions, I'm doing it, or giving it, or consecrating these actions to Ishvara. You are submitting, you're surrendering to Ishvara. That's a Ishvara Arpana Buddhi. And the second thing, what also happens is one needs to have this kind of prasada buddhi. That brings the prasannata in your mind. You're accepting any results that you may get as a blessing from a God, as a prasadam from the God, as an yagna shishtam from the God. So this is where the beauty of prasadam comes in. Because I remember hearing a very nice talk by Kripananda Warrior in Tamil, where he said the difference between sadam and prasadam. Sadam is something which you eat. And prasadam, when you offer to the God, when you get it as a blessing, when you get it as an agnashishtam, it becomes prasadam. So one needs to develop this prasada buddhi more and more. And while we're doing this, while we are developing this Ishvara Arpana Buddhi, the Prasada Buddhi, and having a proper action, we start to discharge the duty. Every duty that comes to us, every duty that's been assigned to us as a spirit of dedication. And we offer it to the Lord. And we have a sense between us saying that no duty is inferior or superior. This is not a good thing. This is not a bad thing. Whatever that comes to me, I will do it, provided it's ethically and morally correct and I'm following all the dharmic principles. And especially if it is a swadharma, if it is my duty for me, it's my duty to do it, and I have to complete it to the best of my ability, to the best for my ability to progress in a spiritual path. So this is how the whole thing gets tied in together. So once you look at this template, you need to understand that the Shravanam is nothing but listening with attention. It's a prerequisite. Once you have Shravanam inbuilt in between it, the way we slowly progressed towards moksha, from the Karma Yoga towards Jnana Yoga, is by having mental purity, which is called Chitta Shuddhi, or the single pointedness of the mind, Chitta Ekagrata. So this is what the Mananam will help you. Mananam is nothing but understanding, reflecting, because what the first step is Shravanam, where you listen with attention. The second step is Mananam, where you try to understand on what we listen, when we try to reflect the deeper meaning. This is where the Chitta Shuddhi, the mental purity, or the Chitta Ekagrata, the single pointedness of the mind comes in. Once this sets in, you go into the mode of Chitta Naishchalya. That is the steadiness of the mind. And this is what is being equated to Nididhyasana, where you contemplate deeply on the essence of what you have heard, on what you have reflected. You heard it in Shravanam, you reflected that in Mananam, and in Nididhyasanam, you're contemplating the deeper essence of it. And once you contemplate there in Nididhyasanam, it automatically takes you to Sakshatkaram. That is a self-knowledge. That's the Atma Jnanam, where the total Atma Nivedanam happens, where it leads you to the real knowledge, the Brahma Vidya. And that Brahma Vidya takes you to salvation, moksha. So everything is interconnected. And the easiest way to look into it is looking at it from a Chitta Shuddhi, Chitta Ekagrata point is Mananam, Chitta Naishchalyam is Nididhyasanam, and Atma Jnanam is Sakshatkaram, and all these things gives into moksha. When we try to explain this in a very simple manner, one of the things that really caught my attention is this particular. So look at the first drawing here, or the first picture here, Shravanam. The cup has to be clean. Your mind has to be clean. The cup has to be empty. Your mind has to be empty to accept, to listen anything that is good. That is Shravanam. Look at the person pouring black coffee into the white ceramic mug. So that can be equated to Shravanam. And Mananam is when you start to think about it. Okay, I've collected all the stuff. What's it? And that is when a piece of sugar cube just falls into it. So you see some ripples happening. There's a little bit of imbalance there. And you start some ideas to pop up. And when it comes to Nididhyasanam, that is where you take a spoon and you stir the sugar cube. The sugar completely dissolves. The sweetness permeates into the entire coffee. That is how all the concepts which you have heard in Shravanam, the one which you have been thinking about in Mananam, when you go into the deep contemplative mode in Nididhyasanam, it percolates into each and every grain of coffee. And the whole cup of coffee, the sweetness is equally spread. So this is an example which was shared with me, and I found it very useful, especially when I was comparing this chart to understand it, to drive the point, to make sure that I remember very well. I always think about these three exercises, which I do every day in my life. So when you're also looking into a Karma Yoga perspective, we are still in the bottom step. We are just like animals most of the time. We work for us, we work for the self. And this is where the yajna or sacrifice, the selfless attitude, dedicating our actions to the common welfare comes in. This is where our scriptures keep saying that any animal can do work for the self or for the family, but you need to think higher. You need to step up to the next level where you're working for the community. Then when you start doing it, step up one more step higher, work for the nation. And when you're doing working for the nation, make sure that the whole world is yours. You work for the universe. And that gives you a sense, sarva jana sukhino bhavantu. You're looking at from a loka kshema perspective, the welfare of the whole world. Let the whole world be happy. That there'll be global well-being. So this is where people tell you, get out, help others. You need to progress it. And that is why even in Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna tells Arjuna in one of the shlokas, one who only takes and not gives is a thief. Such a beautiful concept, which is getting mixed with a beautiful concept of Karma Yoga, where there's a need to help others. To summarize, give up these three thoughts while doing any activity. It's mine. I am the doer, or the fruit of action is for me. So once you stop following these three thoughts, you'll be untouched by karma. So with that note, let's come back to the same slide which we started with. What exactly do you want in life? Is it the success in human life, where there is more prominence of what you get, what you earn, your artha, your kama, the first two purusharthams? Or do you want to look more into the shreyas aspect of it instead of the prayas, where you want to look more into the success of human life, where you're trying to reach the final goal of moksha, helping everyone with dharma inbuilt into each and every step which we do. So that's something which we need to do. And that is why the Bhagavad Gita, which is nothing but the Veda, looks into it and gives in a very beautiful saying it, Abhyudhyaya or Nishrayasa. And Abhyudhyaya comes under dharma, artha, and kama. And these are all coming under the karma and the upasana mode, which is the goal in life. And Nishrayasa is the moksha, which is the jnana path, which is the goal of life. So these are the two main differences, but I'm not going to go too much into the slide because we will be talking about the slide as we conduct this particular class at the Guruvayurappan Temple of Brampton every Friday evening from 8 to 9, where we would be looking into each greater depths of Karma Yoga, where we would be analyzing it, discussing it. So during that time, we will be discussing this in more greater detail. So with that, as Lord Krishna said, fix your mind on me, have firm faith in me, dedicate all your actions unto me, and make a total surrender to me. That's a beautiful concept of Bhagavad Gita. And with a small subhashitam, I would like to end my today's talk. And subhashitams are like little pearls. And some of the subhashitams are 100 years old. And there are some subhashitams which I was told are close to 6,000 years old. So this particular subhashitam I was told is close to 2,000 plus years old, which we don't know. And it's got a beautiful meaning. It goes like this. Hastasya bhushanam danam satyam kantasya bhushanam strotasya bhushanam shastram bhushanaihi kim prayojanam. The meaning goes like this. The ornament for the hand is charity. If I have got two wonderful hands, I need to do more and more charity work. The ornament for my neck is truth. Be what come, what may. I need to tell the truth, stand for the truth. The ornament for the ear is scriptures. I need to hear more and more. That's the ornament for my scriptures. What use then are all of the gross ornaments? What are beautiful wordings. The ornament for the hand is charity. The ornament for the neck is truth. The ornament for the ear is scriptures. What use then are all of the gross ornaments? So with that note, I will end today's talk. And as I mentioned, I approximately took 55 minutes. I still have 5 more minutes for a quick question and answer session. So for people connecting from outside Canada who have never been to the Guruvayurappan Temple, this is how the Guruvayurappan Temple looks like. You're looking at the main idol. So I'm